is entitled Establishing the Justice of God. Although it is questionable whether anyone on earth is entitled to speak on such a theme, I will try to address this topic the best that I possibly can. In terms of religion, the era of monotheistic religions has continued for 2,000 or 3,000 years now, and there is a tendency to consider monotheism to be pure and non-monotheistic religions to be muddled and defiled. Of course, there is nothing wrong with monotheistic religions that worship a universal God who loves all humankind, but there are also those that worship a specific God who only protects one particular ethnic group. Forcing other ethnic groups to believe in their own God would mean that one particular group could completely dominate others. That would be unreasonable. On this issue, Happy Science teaches that there are different levels of gods and different ethnic gods. In fact, countries have their own ethnic god, whose role is to bring prosperity and wealth to his people and to guide them in the right way. When some particular countries make progress and gain national strength, or in other words, when 4 or 5 powerful countries emerge, cultural friction arises, and competition occurs between ethnic gods, each striving to prove whose teachings would be able to better guide humankind to happiness, as well as bringing prosperity to a country. When this competition exceeds a certain point, a war sometimes breaks out. Looking back in human history, there were many major wars. Those wars were all tragic. There is no such thing as a non-tragic war. They all ended in tragedy, no matter which side people were on. But at the same time, world history shows that through major wars, great nations sometimes rise and sometimes perish. A dominant country would go into decline, and another great power would emerge, thereby resulting in a change of age. We see many such occurrences on a small scale in everyday society. Various companies prosper greatly at times, yet at other times they go under and are replaced by other companies. A similar principle is at work in the rise and fall of countries. While in the case of war, human lives are at stake, which is a serious matter. In the case of competition between companies, people will suffer financial problems by losing jobs. Of course, they could perish if they lose their jobs and can no longer feed themselves. So it is true that financial problems could also lead to death. Looking at the world trend over the past 2,000 or 3,000 years, some countries begin to compete against one another whenever they grow larger and stronger. Then wars would break out. This trend will not disappear so easily. There is also a tendency that the more fervently countries engage in military reduction, the more likely it is for a war to break out as a repercussion. In many cases, military reductions are imposed on weak countries by powerful ones as limiters to prevent opposition. This leads to a buildup of resentment in weak countries, which often resorts to expansionist policies. In that sense, military reductions are not always effective and are extremely difficult matters to deal with. I have made various comments about international politics. In this section, I would like to consider things from the perspectives of today's international politics and religion. From a religious perspective, issues involving Islam cannot be overlooked. The situation is still fluid and will continue to fluctuate. So it is difficult to think about it definitively. But I would like to start with a conclusion. There are supposedly around 1.6 billion Muslims throughout the world. Slightly older references note there were 1 billion or 800 million. So there is no doubt their numbers are increasing. Islam is very widespread among the world's poor, especially in poverty-stricken regions. So in some ways it may be spreading as a substitute for communism and socialism in the past. Thus, as Islam is spreading among the needy, we could say that it is spreading within communities that are struggling to overcome the status quo, but have little hope of improving their condition. On the other hand, Christianity is said to have 2 to 2.2 billion believers, so it is true to say that Islam is drawing close. Islam is now being criticized because some extremists are conducting many dreadful acts of terrorism, but the number is still increasing. Accordingly, there must definitely be aspects of Islam that cannot be understood with Christian values. It is often said that there are no righteous wars. Nevertheless, I believe that unless the attacker has a just cause that is totally understood and supported by the global community, the ones being attacked, the ones defending their own territory, people, and families, are not necessarily evil. This can be said of anything. In the world, there is a rather widespread mindset based on monotheism, which regards other religions as heretical. However, in many cases, this judgment comes from ignorance. People are simply thinking as they were taught in their religion. It would seem that even church leaders are often limited to this level of awareness. In the course of their missionary work, they enthusiastically preach that their beliefs are the only ones that can save people, and they gradually narrow their scope to say that there is no salvation other than through Jesus. Nevertheless, I can well understand why religions tend to move in that direction. Only in recent years has it become possible to think about things on a global scale. Until then, each group in each era made decisions based on its central ideas. So in the past, when communications had not developed, it was nearly impossible for people to think about things on a global scale. Even in Hitler's day, there was still a certain amount of distance between European countries. Now, the time has finally come when we can think about things on a global scale. Therefore, the criteria for justice will change from ethnically focused ones to more universal ones. Whether someone is right will be judged from an international perspective. There are drawbacks to an approach that makes decisions based solely on numbers too. The decision will differ depending on the style taken. For example, whether the population alone is taken into consideration, or whether each and every country is considered to have one vote regardless of size. So a purely numerical approach should not be adopted. After all, we must fully explore the theme, what is right?
Everyone has an understanding of God, but what if the confusion and clarity lied in the fact that there are two concepts of God? One is the universal God, while the other is the ethnic God of different countries. Wars occur when cultural friction and competition among these ethnic gods arise and escalate past a certain point. Now that we can think of things from a global perspective, we need to decide what the criteria of justice is, not from an ethnocentric perspective, but a global perspective. Let's go back to the lecture to hear more about global justice.
Then, what are the criteria of justice that God upholds? The answers can be found in the flow of human history. God does not expect history to be something static and monotonous. People can sometimes become corrupt if they wield power for a long time. Organizations created by people can collapse after exceeding their effective periods, such as 1, 2, or 3 centuries. Some say that a revolution occurs when an organization gets out of step with the times. Thus, God considers innovation a matter of course. If people of the world want to know what God's justice is, I would advise them to read my books, The Laws of the Sun, The Golden Laws, and The Laws of Eternity, and try to understand the philosophy in them. It's not so difficult to read all 3 books. It certainly wouldn't take a lifetime. Reading speed may vary for each person, but I think you can read them in about a week or 10 days. By reading them, you can understand that there are different grades in gods. They range from the universal God that thinks about global justice to gods that think about individual regions, countries, or ethnic groups. You'll also understand that from the books that angels, prophets, and Messiah-like souls are born in certain intervals to create a religion. In other words, there are differences between religions, and each of those religions was founded to bring salvation to the people of its day and region. Despite this, various wars and conflicts arise because certain beliefs are not suited to a different era or to a different region's way of thinking. That is why I want to get rid of wars, conflicts, and misunderstandings that arise from mutual ignorance. I am sure that once people of the world understand the philosophy taught in the Laws of the Sun, the Golden Laws, and the Laws of Eternity, answers to many questions will become clear. Christian countries fought among themselves in World War II, America versus Germany, Germany versus France, Germany versus Britain. They're all Christian countries. As they killed one another, they probably said, "Lord, forgive me. Amen." They all fought in the name of God. So this was unfortunate. Jesus said, "Render, therefore, to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." This could be taken as a basis for the separation of church and state. However, I feel that the separation of church and state has a negative effect. What would have happened if this idea didn't exist, and if they had strictly followed Christ's words in politics? Given that diplomacy is an extension of politics, and war is an extension of diplomacy, if they had kept the spirit of Christianity in wartime as well, they wouldn't have been able to engage in such senseless slaughter. However, in reality, politics separated from religion, and that may have worked in a negative way. The roots of Islam and Japanese Shinto are surprisingly similar, and they share some commonalities. They both believe that someone close to God should rule a country. Both have a profusion of war gods. In that sense, they are very similar. I intend to gradually clarify the parts that are common to Japanese Shinto, Islam, and Judaism. I have also confirmed the spiritual truth that the souls of Christian saints are being reincarnated as leaders of various religions in Japan. People can't transcend their nationality so easily, but some souls transcend nationally and move surprisingly freely around the world. Let me explain this in terms of a company. There are different departments, some weak and some strong. In a company, efforts are made to ensure that everything goes smoothly overall by transferring personnel or deciding who to send to which department. The same effort is observed in the religious world. This is a reflection of God's management. What I want to say is this. The biggest desire of God is for many people, or if possible, everyone without exception, to live in happiness. Many scholars who specialize in international politics often use a parable from Christianity to explain the principle of politics. They say that if one sheep out of a flock of 100 goes astray, the principle of politics would be to lead the remaining 99 sheep to safety, whereas the principle of religion would be to search the countryside for the lost sheep. However, what I teach at Happy Science is different. I don't tell people to save the lost sheep at the expense of the other 99. I say that you must also protect the 99 while caring for the lone sheep. Maybe I'm asking for too much, but I tell people to do both. In other words, while we aim for the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, we have to care for those who have slipped through the safety net too. I'm saying that you shouldn't organize everything around the ladder. The recent Piketty hypothesis from France condemns widening income inequality. and it proposes to level everything in accord with the